All right, everyone, welcome back. You know that feeling where you can understand a ton of English, but then actually speaking it out loud feels impossible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been there. Like, I remember when I first started learning, I would be fine reading and listening, but then I'd freeze up when I actually had to, like, talk to someone.
It's a super common problem. And that's what we're diving into today. We've got this fascinating research all about how to get past that hurdle and actually start speaking English confidently.
Right.
And the really cool thing is it's not just about like knowing more vocabulary or grammar rules.
Definitely not. I mean, those things are important, but it really comes down to training your brain in a different way. It's almost like building a whole new skill set, you know?
Exactly. Okay, so the first thing our source talks about is this thing called the translation trap.
Okay, the translation trap, what's that?
It's basically when you try to translate every single thought from your native language into English before you speak.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I think I used to do that all the time without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's super common. But the problem is it slows you down and makes your speech sound less natural.
Right, because you're so focused on getting the translation perfect that you lose the flow of the conversation.
Exactly. So the source suggests a really interesting shift. They say we should try to start thinking directly in English.
Whoa, thinking directly in English, how do you even do that?
Well, think about it this way. Like, let's say you're making coffee in the morning. Instead of thinking about each step in your native language, try to narrate it in your head in English. Like, I'm grinding the beans. Okay, now I'm pouring the water. That kind of thing.
No, that's a cool idea. So basically just narrate your life in English.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for small things at first. It helps your brain get used to forming thoughts in English without that translation step.
Makes sense. And I can see how that would be super helpful for becoming more fluent and just more natural sounding. But I'm also thinking about, what about mistakes? Like, what if you're thinking in English, but then you make a mistake when you speak?
That's a great point. Yeah. And honestly, that fear of making mistakes is something that holds a lot of people back, myself included sometimes.
Yeah, totally. It can be so discouraging. Like you're just putting yourself out there and then you mess up and it feels like, I'm never going to get this.
Totally. But the research that we dove into for this deep dive actually has some really encouraging things to say about mistakes.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that because I need some encouragement in that area.
Okay, so apparently there's this specific part of our brain called Broca's area, which is basically the speech production center.
Okay, Broca's area. Got it.
And the more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
And this is the key part. That includes when we make mistakes.
Wait, so making mistakes actually helps strengthen the part of our brain responsible for speaking?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like working out a muscle, but for your speaking ability.
I love that. So instead of being afraid of mistakes, we should be like, yes, another rep. I'm getting stronger.
Exactly. It's proof that your brain is learning and growing. Our source also suggests that we should be kind to ourselves when we make mistakes, right? Like it's a process. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even native speakers make mistakes all the time. We just don't notice them as much because we're so used to hearing them.
That's a good point. It's so easy to be super hard on ourselves when we're learning a language, but we have to remember that everyone goes through that.
Definitely. So we've talked about thinking in English and embracing those glorious mistakes. What are some other practical things we can do to actually get better at speaking?
All right. Well, our source mentions this cool technique called shadowing. Have you ever heard of that?
Shadowing. Maybe. Is that like when you follow someone around and copy everything they do?
Well, kind of. But in this case, it's with speaking. So you find a recording of a native speaker, like a TED Talk, a podcast episode, maybe even a scene from a movie that you really like.
Okay, so I pick my favorite scene from, let's say, Pride and Prejudice.
Perfect. And then you basically try to speak along with it. You mimic their rhythm, their pronunciation, their intonation, everything.
Oh, wow. So it's like you're trying to become their voice double.
Exactly. And it can feel a little weird at first, but it's actually a really fun way to practice, and you start to internalize those natural patterns of English.
That's cool. I'm definitely going to try that. But what if, I want to say something specific, not just repeat what someone else is saying?
Oh, I get it. So for that, there's another technique called chunking, which I personally find super helpful, especially when I'm trying to say a longer or more complex sentence.
Chunking. Okay, that sounds interesting, like breaking things down into smaller pieces.
Exactly. So let's say you want to say, this weekend, I'm planning to visit my grandparents who live in the countryside. That's kind of a mouthful, right?
Yeah, that's a lot to say all at once.
So with chunking, you break it down into smaller phrases like, this weekend, pause for a second, I'm visiting my grandparents, another pause, who live in the countryside.
Ooh, that does sound way easier. And more natural, too. Like you're giving your brain a chance to catch up.
Right. And it helps prevent that feeling of being overwhelmed or getting tongue-tied.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got some great techniques here. But I'm thinking, all this practice is great, but at some point we actually have to talk to real people.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. That's the ultimate goal, right?
Exactly. And it can be so nerve-wracking to put yourself out there. Like, what if people judge me? What if I freeze up?
I know, it's tough. But the good news is there are tons of ways to find speaking opportunities that feel comfortable and supportive.
Oh, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, one thing the source suggests is joining a language exchange group.
Language exchange. Okay. I think I've heard of those, but remind me how that works again.
Basically, you connect with people who are learning your native language and you help each other practice.
Oh, that's cool. So I could help someone practice, I don't know, Spanish, and they could help me with my English.
Exactly. And there are tons of language exchange groups online and in person. Another idea is to find a hobby group where English is spoken.
Ah, like a book club or a hiking group or something like that.
Exactly. It's a fun way to practice your English while doing something you enjoy.
I love that. So you're not just focusing on the language, you're actually connecting with people and having fun.
Yeah. And honestly, even just chatting with friends or family members who speak English can be really helpful.
True. Okay, so we've got the practice part covered, but I'm also thinking about the mental game, like how do we build that confidence and overcome those feelings of self-doubt?
That's such an important question because honestly, confidence plays a huge role in how well we speak a language.
Definitely. If you're constantly second guessing yourself and worrying about making mistakes, it's going to be harder to speak fluently.
Totally. But our source emphasizes that confidence is something you can build over time.
Okay, but how? How do we build confidence when we're just starting out and feeling, kind of clueless?
Well, one of the key things they mentioned is to start speaking early. Like, don't wait until you feel perfect to start practicing. Even if you only know a few words and phrases, put yourself out there and use them.
So like just jump in and start talking, even if it feels a little awkward.
Exactly. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll become. And they also talk about the importance of setting realistic goals. Like, what does fluency mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good point. Fluency doesn't have to mean speaking perfectly without any hesitation.
Right. It's about being able to communicate your ideas effectively and feeling comfortable doing it.
Okay, so start speaking early, set realistic goals. I'm writing this down. What else can we do to boost our confidence?
Well, something they emphasize throughout the source is the power of celebrating small wins. Like, notice those moments when you successfully use a new word or phrase, when you have a conversation that flows smoothly, when you understand something you didn't before.
Oh, I love that. It's so easy to focus on the negative and get discouraged, but we should really take the time to acknowledge those small victories.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are tons of people who have gone through the same challenges and come out the other side speaking English confidently.
That's encouraging to hear. Okay, so I'm curious, what's like one tiny step that our listeners can take today to start putting all this into practice?
That's a great question. Well, maybe try out one of the shadowing techniques we talked about. Find a short audio clip or video and practice speaking along with it. Or maybe think of a simple situation, like ordering coffee or asking for directions, and practice saying those phrases in your head in English. Or if you're feeling brave, try having a short conversation in English with a friend or family member.
Those are all great ideas. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's
Right.
all about taking those small steps and building that confidence muscle.
Exactly. The most important thing is to keep practicing and enjoy the process. You've got this.
You've got this, listeners. We believe in you.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But hey, here's something to think about. We've talked about a bunch of different techniques and mindsets for speaking more confidently, but what if you could combine those with, like, a physical activity? Think about it, like practicing your English while you're going for a walk or doing yoga or even cooking dinner. Could that help you learn even faster? I don't know, maybe it's something to experiment with.
That's a cool idea. I'm going to try that. Thanks, everyone. Until next time.
See you next time.